Well, colleagues, I think we need to start to get the show off the ground. I think it's one of the opportunities that we've got to also reach people at home or other spaces. So it's also one of the ways that we can maybe showcase a little bit more about Blackboard Collaborate. So before I allow a sort of a general discussion, we are going to have a discussion today, not a lecture. I'm not going to lecture to you because it's a fairly open topic that we want to deal with today. And the topic for today, as you can see, will be on adaptive learning. The first thing that I want to do is, before we start, maybe just for those newcomers who's not too up to date with a Collaborate platform, as you can see, you've got the presentation in front of you. At the bottom of the screen, you will see some areas. The one is basically you. It refers to you. The next to that is a microphone button. If it's green and it basically shows movement, it means that it's capturing your voice and presenting. And then we've got the video camera next to that. The nice thing about using video is that the person talking, it will automatically jump to the video of that individual talking. But seeing that we may have bandwidth issues, let's not use the video recording for now. The video recording, unfortunately, also at this moment, as you can see in the bottom corner there's my face, and I look like an alien because I'm talking to people in the venue at the same time. I've got a headset on, but only fortunately the one ear is open, so I can half hear what people in the room is going to say. So I'm going to disconnect the video just for some people who might bandwidth. Just give a problem with the reception. And I will hand over to you. But what we have is a little bit of just a sort of a business rule. When you want to speak, you raise your hand, and then basically I will pass over to you. I will then mute my microphone. And then once you've stopped talking, just do exactly the same thing. Just click on the microphone button and mute your microphone. Otherwise, you may have either increased bandwidth or sometimes, like what I saw in the chat room, a little bit of people talking about the heavy breathing in the background. Okay, it's actually not that. On the right-hand side, you will see the chat function. You've got the number of participants online being 7. I'm very formal, and I think also Sonwabo is also formal. Mr. Sonwabo Yungile, and mine is also Mr. Isaac Smit. The only reason why that is we basically came in from the Blackboard portal side. So we logged into the space where the your credentials in there. The rest of you came in using the link that was distributed to you by Sonwabo. And when you click on the link, the system recognizes you as someone who do not have an account on Blackboard. So in that case, you need to type in your name. But sometimes be prescriptive, I can see that people don't really like lowercase, uppercase, whatever. So it's just Rita and Daniela and Pam and so forth. And I know all 3 of them, but to be quite honest, I don't always know all the people. So, especially if you're dealing with people from other universities or other entities, on that. So then also I can maybe also respond to that as we go along. Otherwise, if So on the other side, people here that you start sounding like one of these chipmunks or something. But just bear with us. We are also going to record the session so that we can refer to that later on as well. Right, any questions? Anyone would like to ask some questions on the presentation and the format itself? Yes, sir.
I was supposed to be on, is it?
No, you don't need to. If you're in the venue, you can just listen and see what the other people are doing online. That's also maybe, I think that's a very good question. This is something that I left out. Sometimes when you want to have a session between groups of people, what you do is you've got a speaker system. So have the polling function, then you can also participate in the polling function. Otherwise, you'll have to raise your hand in the room. But you can do the same as what we've done currently, as we've the collaborate session on a data projector projecting on the screen so the whole class can see what's happening and also the participation from others. Right. If you're all happy, I think even in that you can, under your tools and content sharing, there's also some information that you can just show if you're happy or not in the chat session, and in your My Settings you can show whether you're happy or not. Right, so what we need to do is moving on to today's topic. It's a difficult concept because it asks a lot more questions than what it answers. Okay, but fortunately, you know, this is why we're all lecturing in a higher education institution, because the first thing that you need to do is you need to be able to adapt, and you need to be able to adapt your teaching and learning styles. Sometimes I'm a little bit worried that I see a lot of academics still teaching the same way as their parents were taught 40 years ago. And we have moved into a totally different environment. And we're talking to a different cohort of students. I myself had the opportunity that I taught from the 80s, starting off in a totally black institution, having a totally different culture than my own. So I had to adapt my teaching methodology to adapt to my students. Then I moved to an institution that was totally white. And again, suddenly, you know, I could find myself because the cultures were the same. And then moving into the new scenario where we find a mix of students from all different groups and cultures. And immediately I saw that none of the previous two methods were perfect. I had to adapt again. And if you don't adapt, you lose out. Students are coming to the class, they're sitting there, you don't always know whether they participate or not. Okay, so I'm asking a few questions there. Are your student cohort homogeneous? That means, do you teach in your space to students coming from the same ethnicity, same culture, same background, same teaching environment? So yeah, let's, if I can just quickly try and see that thing, let's ask that question, yes and no. Okay, so the poll is open. Are your student cohort homogeneous? Okay, out of the, I think I should also maybe there respond. So currently we find that all the people are saying no. Also in my room, maybe just a show of hands because you're not using the polling function. So in this case also, so it seems like most of us say no. All right, and if we look at the information, the most of that say no, we don't. Okay, in the polling for this one. Second one. Now the question that I asked is very simple. How do you teach? for what of your student body do you teach to? And now we can start thinking about language. We can think about ethnicity, culture, belief. The third part. Are you teaching to all of them? So again, the question is, and I'm asking the question, do you think that you're teaching to all your students? Okay, the question's there. I've got one person who says yes. Now I've got 3. Okay, so we're going to come back later on in the session to ask those 3 to also then respond and show us some of their ideas on how they teach to different groups. Right, and now the third one that I'd like to do is I'd like us to go to the third question there. How do you assess? And this is unfortunately not an open, we can't have a polling for this. So the question there is, maybe you can type it into the chat box. Just give me a short summary what you think. How do you assess? I know it's a very open question, but give me an idea on, do you assess the students on outcomes, or do you think that you assess the students on feeding back to what you taught them? That means, it's more like a memory or regurgitation of content to students that they now need to reply to you. Okay, Pam says 40% of my marks are based on adaptive testing. Pam, I need you to maybe just clarify your definition of adaptive testing there. And Daniela on outcomes and progress learning. Okay, we're going to come back to that later on and say, how do you do that to make sure that you reach your whole student body? And I'll show you some information that I got from a recent presentation by Prof. Eric Mazur. Now, if we look at the next slide there, I see Sebongile says feedback to what they have learned and partly on outcomes. Okay, now we look at adaptive learning. The concept of adaptive learning, I've given some information there as an extract from the 27 Higher Education Edition report, the NMC Horizon report. It's something that we, especially in technology and teaching and learning, uses to see what is the sort of latest adoption and what is the latest trends that develops. A lot of people may say, yes, but it's not really applicable to my space or my environment, but it's still a nice to have to try and relate to what's happening in the world. All right, if I look at the Horizon report, it says, according to EDUCAUSE, it is dynamically adjust to the level or type of course content based on an individual's abilities and skills attainment in ways that accelerates a learner's performance. Now, the one thing that's mentioned there is automated, and then secondly, instructor intervention. And this is where machine learning comes in, where you can look at your student body and you can also see whether that is the way that your technology automatically adapts to the type of assessment needs. And then also the goal of adaptive learning will be to accurately and logically move students through a learning path, empowering active learning, targeting at-risk populations, and assessing factors affecting completion student success. Advocates for adaptive learning believe that it can be a solution for the iron triangle. That means to try to balance the issues of cost, access, and quality. Now, think back. You said that you are basically assessing your students on their individual skills and so forth. Now, one of the questions that may come up if we look at this is that, do we still, and I'm going to ask that question, I'm not asking for an answer now, but think about the question that students still write the same test in the same time slot as all the other students, and they all write their examination in the structured, timetabled way that they set up. And I'm going to ask you that question technically again. Do you allow your students to design their own learning path? That you may have students doing the course in a shorter space of time or taking longer, but still belong to the same cohort of students. And I think when I ask that question, I can answer that for most people to say no. We are in a very structured scenario. Students cannot design their own learning path in terms of progress. What they can do is they can most probably, if you've got a properly designed course, they can follow different paths, and the different paths that they follow will be more in terms of their ability, their skills, the type of reassessments that you allow, or multiple assessments, and so forth. But the thing is that they still need to fit into a very strict formal timetable. Okay, then also if we look at the trend moving forward, if we just look in general what the 2017 Horizon report is and where it comes from, as you can see, these are the key trends accelerating technology adoption in higher education, and there you can see advancing cultures of innovation and deeper learning approaches. So we also need to link up what we do here with the other key trends. The midterm trends, normally 2 to 5 years, is growing focus on measuring learning, redesigning learning spaces, and then the short-term trends, normally this year or within the next 2 years, will be on blended learning designs and collaborative learning. So those are some of the trends that we pick up in the Horizon report. And then also if we look at the key trends accelerating technology adoption, there we look at advancing cultures of innovation, deeper learning approaches, the same that I copied in there. Seems like my slide is a little bit confusing there. And then the challenges. I think we also need to look at challenges, because sometimes it is the people who normally manages the challenges best who will then excel in terms of adoption. Now, improving digital literacy. That is a problem, something that I pick up a lot from people where they say, my students are not ready. I sometimes don't know whether it's the students or them, or that we use the wrong technology or the wrong approach. But still, it's a general improvement of digital literacy, and I'd like to start with academics on that one. And then also integrating formal and informal learning. And then also some of the more difficult challenges, those that we understand but for which solutions are a little bit elusive, is the achievement. Can you just switch off your mic or your speaker? Okay, the one being the achievement gap. And this is where I'll show you what Prof. Mazur said in terms of assessment, is that unfortunately assessment is not measuring student performance. It is measuring teaching and learning, reporting. It is placing people. It's a ranking system, and it's a supply of information back to management. Then some wicked challenges. Those are complex to even define. That is making knowledge obsolescence, and then also rethinking the roles of educators. To be quite honest, in some senses, we haven't seen a difference in teaching modalities. We may change here and there a little bit in teaching practice, but we don't really challenge this whole environment of asking us what the role of educator is today. Okay, then moving on to Prof. Eric Mazur's topic, and I think I can share some of that later on. He said assessment is the silent killer of learning. And then I'm going to ask that question again, so keep it in the back of your mind. Do you think that your assessment basically kills learning? He went in depth using an old-fashioned, well, sorry, I say it's an old-fashioned just because it's been there for very long, but still one of the best there is, and that is Bloom's taxonomy. It's a fantastic taxonomy, but do we really assess our students for deeper learning? Or are we just asking them to reflect? And this is where assessment can sometimes be the silent killer of learning. And now coming back to your student body. If you say that your student body are not homogeneous, that means that they are fairly diverse, made up of a lot of individuals with their own learning styles, culture, beliefs, and you keep on using exactly the same format of assessment, then maybe we are missing the point somewhere. Because it's absolutely difficult to try and give your cohort of students different assessment practices. If you pass the ratings of all your subjects over a 3 or 4 year period, then we rate you as being an A class or B or C class in terms of the content and the learning delivery. But is it always based on outcome? Okay, so some of the student activity you can measure. You can also go in more detail where you can look at your student cohort. This is available under your evaluation student data, your analytics data. And this is where you can identify where your student sits within the group. Unfortunately, please, the colors are wrong. The colors are supposed to be blue on the right-hand corner and red in the left-hand corner. So the colors are wrong, but the rest of the data is right if you compare that to the top one. Because you would like to identify a student in terms of their cohort, and then even if you are so simplistic to look at this group of students and say, I've got 4 quadrants, and I basically need to have 4 different learning paths developed within my teaching and learning for students to plot their own learning path from the start to the finish. And maybe now the question is, and we can open that later on for the chat session or for the discussion session. To be quite honest, it's not all doom and gloom. I remember, way back, even went back to some of my old presentations, found a presentation in 1988 that we did for Nariosa for the National Education, for Distance Education, National Association of Distance Education of South Africa, where I presented exactly this in terms of 3, I just divided that into 3 groups. I called the first one sort of more your digital experimental type student. These are the students that you need to excite in your class with additional data more than what the other students need. And then basically step aside and allow them to plot their own path. What you need to do, facilitate and assist during that path. But don't always keep on bringing them back and say, hey, whoa, we are now on chapter 1. You're already at chapter 2. So stop, we're going to get there next week or next month or whatever. And I've seen that even in my personal life is where I found it very difficult. The first thing that I did when I got to a new standard, or in those days, nowadays, grades, to take the books and started reading into the books. I didn't just stick to the chapters that we were based on that at that stage. I was hungry for more information, and I was constantly brought back and saying, no, not there yet. I remember having a massive argument with a teacher one day in a maths class where I solved the solution by using a theorem that we have not discussed yet, just because it made sense to me. And he told me bluntly, we are only going to do that theorem in 2 weeks' time. So you're not allowed to use that. I said, but that thing with 3 steps to get to the solution. Yours is something like about 20 steps. So why can't I use that? And I was told, we're not there yet. So, this is sometimes, I say, we sometimes can be stifling student performance. Technology allows you to do that. Because with technology, you can add more and more material for the student who would like to excel. You can have more self-testing, more activities for that student. You can have groups of students that you identify through the retention center that may be excelling in the space, and they are basically being brought back all the time to fit into the class progress at that time. Then you've got the middle of the road students. They're happy. And I sometimes say, they're the guys that's sitting in the class, and the only reason why they're in your class, they're not there. They are physically there, but the lights are not on. And the reason why they're there is because their mothers are worried about them. It's a dangerous place out there. So keep them off the streets and in the class, at least then someone else looks after them. So they're the safe ones. They are so used to just follow the crowd. They just do the minimum. They do perform. They do pass. They do, but they don't really rock the boat. And then you find that you've got a lower end of the students who may say, now that I've done this assessment, can I do it again? And I normally ask them why. And they say, but now I know what you want. Now I'd like to set the same assessment. Now, before technology, that was a bit difficult because then you had to set another 2, 3, 4, 5 tests and you had to reassess that all the time. Nowadays with technology, you can have data sets and you can allow a student multiple assessments for the same session, and if you feel that maybe they are taking that just to get a better score, then you can use the average or the lowest or the highest or the latest or whatever the case may be. But you can change your assessment practices to allow for students who say, I want to do it again. I also see a lot of students sometimes sitting in peer groups where peer learning is the way that they learn. But, you know, especially with large groups, we can't allow that. You can't have the part of the students who don't want that. They can work on their own. They can excel. And then we bring them back and say, oh, by the way, you know, we think peer assessment is a good thing and peer group work is a good thing. And we bring the top student down and say, please come and work here. There may be a situation where you share through a flipped classroom concept. Better students assist the lower students, but then organize, and then you got their buy-in, you got their support. Right, something else that we've got. Fortunately, nowadays with analytics, we can see a lot more. We can see the use of content. We can see the use of assessment tools within subjects, groups, faculties, departments. And you can then also, for me, this is not trying to get at those who's not doing their work. It's more like a question of identifying the best practice and then ask them to assist in bringing the others up to speed. And then also one of the other where you can look at an individual department or faculty and you can see that there's a lot more work. And to be quite honest, if I look at this, I've worked a lot with industrial and systems engineering and faculty of engineering, and they do excel. Because they've got an active HOD who is really pushing for the use of technology in the department, and the whole group of them are busy excelling. I'd like to look at that department and do some research on that because I know that they had a very low pass rate a few years ago, and I'd like to see how they've changed this thing around because I honestly believe that they may have changed a lot. Right. Okay, some suggestions. And this is where we need to open this up for a discussion. We need to measure and map student learning. Unfortunately, you need to measure because if you don't measure in some sense your student behavior, their actions, their perceptions, their needs, their differences, then how are you going to be assisting that student to map their own learning path? Okay, so, you know, we can't allow that just for guesswork only. We do have a lot of tools available where you can measure student learning. The second thing is we need to redesign learning. We cannot have a one-size-fits-all because if you've got a one-size-fits-all design for your course that you offer, then I must be quite honest, I don't teach all the students all the time. I think you are basically, again, just ranking your students according to a predefined map. And those are most probably the students who is going to pass their exams, get their qualifications, come to job and find themselves to be obsolete because they cannot think. They've never been taught to think. They've never been taught to really go, okay, let's use that very stupid, to think out of the box. Okay, maybe we should get rid of the boxes altogether so that we don't even think inside or outside or in the middle or on top of the box. Colleagues, with that, I'm going to finish this presentation. It's like I say, it's more like a provocation to get people to talk about what they think teaching and learning should be and how you're going to look at your student body as a very unique group of individuals in a very defined, structured process, and now we need to marry the two. So something's got to go. You know, you can't have uniqueness on the one side and then you go and you force them all through a very strict funnel, because then they're all going to come out shaped according to the shape of that funnel. If it's a square funnel, they will all be square. If it's round, they'll be round. And if you press hard enough, they may be tall and thin in a small funnel, big funnel, whatever. Sorry, that is just a way to say that. Right. Now with that, thanks a lot for that. I'm going to open that now for the groups in this session. Maybe will have to relay the discussion, but then also from all our participants online. You can either type something into the chat or raise your hand, maybe give us some idea. Like I said, Pam, 40% of my marks are based on adaptive testing. Can you maybe give us some ideas on what you mean by adaptive testing? Okay, just switch on your microphone, Pam.
I think you can hear me now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let me tell you what I'm doing. I have to teach PGCE students to use the computer to go into the classroom. Can you hear me? Please indicate with a message if you can hear me typing it. Okay, my students have to go into the classroom. I have 180 students over 3 sessions. They come from many different backgrounds. They're not homogeneous. I have allocated 60% of the marks to word processing exam, which they all do the same exam. Spreadsheet exam, they all do the same exam. The other 40%, and I was terrified to do what I did, and nobody has queried what I'm doing. The students choose what they want to do. At the beginning, we were looking at Word, and some of them did very simple Word, relatively simple Word items. Others did more advanced items. Then we looked at PowerPoints, and some did very simple PowerPoints, and others did very advanced PowerPoints. And now we're writing reports, and some of the reports require quite investigation, and others are simple. But the students are choosing ones which fit in with the type of school in which they're going to work and fit in with their own ability. The biggest thing that works for me is that the students must talk and chat to their friends in class. So they sit around and they talk and they work together and they produce the goods. The only problem that I experience is that it's quite intensive marking in inverted commas the work that comes in. 40% is based on their own work that they've chosen to do. They're all learning at their own level and they're all excited. I'm not sure how legal it is what I'm doing. Nobody has complained. I'm happy with what's happening. They're all having a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I think that's insightful. I may have a query. I don't know how realistic my query will be. You said that students basically select based on the schools where they're going to. And that just raised a little bit of a red flag to me. It's almost like, you know, we allow students who's going to, I don't want schools to be differentiated. All schools should be on an equal par. All should be taught on the same high level. So sorry, that was just something maybe I misunderstood there. But the rest I think is actually quite good. That means so students follow different paths. They've got more than one selection of where they go to. So I don't think it's a question of illegal. People need to fit in somewhere. Any other opinions? Okay, Daniela, over to you.
Sorry, I forgot to pick up my mic. So, shall I go on now? My question was if anybody knew about differentiated progression path. We had this gamification seminar a while ago, and a lecturer from Stellenbosch presented on her, it's actually her PhD study. So she has gamified a course, I think, in industrial psychology or so. And the whole semester is basically one game, and the students go through tasks individually and as groups, and they get assigned, they collect points, and there's a leaderboard. But she said the one thing that she's struggling with, that she hasn't done yet, is how to implement different progression paths. So they still get, every week, they all get the same tasks, and then they have 1 week to finish those tasks. So I just wondered if anybody had examples of where students are actually allowed to pick their learning path individually and not as a class.
Thanks, Daniela. I think it's a good start. I also want to refer back to something that Pam said. The moment you start allowing different paths, and I think you also alerted us to the same fact, is that it is not easy on the lecturer, because you need to then be able to do all those evaluations on an individual basis. So there goes your whole ranking system, because you can't just overlay onto that assessment and basically mark using an overlay and then say, but those followed a different path than what I would have thought that to be is now not as good. So yes, Pam, it's a very difficult thing that the moment you look at different learning paths, then it places a lot more emphasis on the lecturer, who needs to mark all those assignments and assessments and activities of the students on an individual basis in terms of their own learning.
But it's interesting, because if you say that, say the outcome is like in Pam's case, if the outcome for the students is to design, so they know which school they're going into, and if the outcome is to design, for example, an activity that fits the context of their school, then they naturally have to go different routes or different paths, because each school is different, and they'll have to do some research about the school that they're going into, the kind of equipment they'll find, the kind of level of digital literacies. So I think the different learning paths are important. About the assessment, that's an interesting question, how you assess them. Maybe you can use peer assessment, or the students can be assessed by the learners. I guess you'd have to think about flexible ways of assessing these things.
Yes, I hear what you say, but this, like I say, from a social aspect, I'm a little bit worried that we plan for certain schools to be better than others. That means the scholars coming out of different schools are again going to be unequal. And that is just a concern from a social aspect, not from a practical aspect. I unfortunately have to agree that the playing fields are also not level outside, but I'm a little bit worried that we sometimes scale down because of the environment instead of trying to improve the environment and then give quality to all. But that's it, just in one aspect. Let's maybe take it into other fields, just not into education. Basha, please, you disagree. Please tell us why. Yes, I do agree. Not a problem. I agree with your basic thoughts. Is that you are going into different environments and you need to plan for your environment. I'm talking from a social aspect where I say that we shouldn't be having different environments. We should all be the same. This is what we're striving to. But there's also the social thought, and then there's the reality. So I agree with you in terms of the reality of the day. All right, anything else on this? Come on, Sarita, be a little bit more bold. I know that you are dealing with a lot of students all over the country from totally different environments. How do you make sure that students can plot their own path of learning? That means create that utopia.
Putting me on the spot, eh? No, I say what you say is utopia. That you know, what you've just said about we create everything that it is, you know, the same for everybody. But no, I try and give them a good variety of assessments and assignments and lots of revision tests. So keep them very busy, and you know, a variety. I don't know. You know, I don't have a solution. As you say, the students are very different, and that is also reality. That some will pass and some will pass well, and others will fail. The good old bell curve.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, sorry, it's not a question that we say that you know, that we differentiate, but the ranking system sometimes is a bit unfair. Unfortunately, I'm trying to summarize Prof. Mazoer's hour-long session into just one sentence. But I think you've already alerted to that, Sarita, is that what you do is you allow students to have additional assessments, reassessments, multiple sessions for the same thing. So that in a sense also means that they can improve their total skill.
Sakkie, could you tell us a little bit about Blackboard and how Blackboard would allow, you know, some more adaptive learning for our students? I mean, what could we use? We could use adaptive release. What have you seen on Blackboard that would allow us for a more adaptive learning?
Danella, yeah, the one thing that we don't have fixed, and that is the machine learning component, where students will automatically be grouped according to their ability. But I think from a teacher perspective, you've got some tools. The first thing is that you've got assessments, and you can either have a single assessment for the group of students, it's make or break, or you can have multiple assessments in the student's own time where you use data sets. And the student will be using the assessment as part of learning, where the one student your top student will set that assessment once and move on. Your other student may need 2, 3, 4 times to go through that same assessment and reach the same standard. So that student will again plot their own learning path, but they can do more or less the same assessments, more or less the same questions, but the same question sets. So that's another tool that you can use. The retention center is something where we can also identify the needs of students. And when we identify the needs of students according to their performance, and also linked to the learner analytics, this is where you can set up the group tools. Now, the group tools can also be prescriptive from the academic, where they develop or where they set the groups, or you can allow students to create their own groups. That means student will also then select people more or less from their own ability. So again, it's the same thing. It's a group discussion, but in the one sense you are predictive, where you put the people in groups. Otherwise, you allow the students to set up their own groups. So it's not a question that there are tools that are more specific in Blackboard that deals with adaptive learning. It's more that we create more than one path for students to get to the same end goal. and the end goal should be outcomes, and the end goal should not be just formulating, or feeding back into it. It should be deep learning. Okay, I just need to just read what Basha said. Please don't get me wrong, I'm new to teaching, so I'm seeing all these brilliant methods of teaching, but it does preclude certain groups. Okay, certain groups cannot properly be assessed in one way. Wouldn't we be flexible to accommodate them in another way? Yeah, I think, to be quite honest, if I take a very simplistic look at this, I will use my technology to put additional information for my tech savvy and my inquisitive learner. I will add more additional reading to them. I will maybe even give them additional assessments, or maybe even a few grades, so that they will at the end of the day score higher. But then at the same time, get them out of my way. And then identify the students who may need individualist support, and then identify whether they would like to work in a group. Now, if you get some of your students out of your way that can do their own learning, then you focus more time on the students who need personalized time. And I've done that myself in the past, where I basically set up the course in such a way that I tell the students, you only need to come to class when you really feel you need to. And then you find that the students who have to come to class are those who really need my attention. But then I've got less students in the class. I've had the situation over the 30 years where I've got a student in the class, a fairly good student, and we still had to take roll call in those days because there was a DP mark as well. And the student hated my guts because I was going too slow. He was always, a sort of a negative person, but not a bad student. He was doing well in all the tests. But he was a sort of a negative in my group. I would have loved to get him out of my class and say, you don't need to attend class because you're bugging me. And I was bugging him because I was going too slow for the student. That was before technology, so unfortunately I could give him additional reading and other material, but I couldn't just let him loose on the internet and say, go Google, But then also maybe something, and I know that a lot of people are saying that we need to switch off the internet and this type, and what about Google? Should people be able to copy from others? I've seen a few good examples, unfortunately, maybe for another day, that is used by a lot of other universities, where students they're grading themselves, but the grading is a game, Daniela, where they, for instance, have to argue their point. They will use peer grading sessions, but the students need to explain their grade, and the whole grading thing becomes almost like, it looks like the JSE, where a group of people are trying to sell ideas to others. They start off with a minimum, and then they need to explain the grading and why they've done that, and then they amend the grade until finally they've got agreement in the group. And that was one of the top Indian universities. So it was not a question that it was used on a very low level. It was used in among students, a very high, how can I say, it's a very top quality school, one of the top IT schools. So again, yeah, it's not simplistic. I think today's session was not about trying to give you solutions, but to alert you of the fact that we are a little bit too structured for a lot of our students. We're losing some of our students on the top and at the bottom end, and we try and focus on the middle group because they're the easy ones. I'm just looking at my cohort of people sitting in front of me. I hate that. They're all looking at me, and I don't know whether they're even listening. They seem like they're listening, but to be quite honest, how do I measure that? How do I measure that there's learning taking place? There's a lot of waffling and teaching from this end of the table, but is there learning? And that is what we need to do in a classroom. You need to try and identify the level of learning that's taking place, the quality of the teaching, and the way that we transfer content to students. So maybe that is the whole idea about the adaptive learning, is that there are different styles for different people. Right, maybe I talk too much. Anyone else?
Okay. Can they see me?
No, they can't see you, but use the microphone.
Okay. Hi guys, this is Martin Suchinga from Electrical. First of all, I want to thank this opportunity to really sit. Message. Okay. Oh, this is new, ne? Okay. I just want to share some of the experiences that I've had. I've actually moved from the traditional classroom kind of a situation and gone to work integrated learning. And in work integrated learning, there's quite a number of challenges. First of all, your students are not in the same class at the same time because they are deployed in the various what called work stations, and some of which are even in international environment. I mean, you'll find them, some of them are in Ghana, some of them are in Congo and what have you. And in a sense, what should they do if you have to assess, talk to them? Should they fly? One incident, the student had to fly from Congo. But after sitting and pondering on this kind of experiences, the students supposed to fly and their visas and what have you, why can't they sort of work wherever they are? And from there, I gained an experience that I should design something. First of all, the method that I was using for assessment was a presentation. The student have to sit in front of me, present, ask questions. And invariably, I realized that the students are so scared. Sometimes when they come in already, they say, Mr. Ching, I'm scared about the questions, blah, 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 blah. And I decided, no, there's something that needs to be done here. And then I decided to go on to the collaboration, online collaboration. And as Sakkie said, I thought I've learned a little bit of what is sharing, that we are just sitting back and not listening. He said, you allow students, in this exactly what I did, to their own accord. They decided to enroll themselves, but I normally ask to be not less than the student must be part 5 generally, because if there's 2, you'll sometimes find that, and I found it to be practically a situation where it's a boy and a girlfriend, and they're sitting the same thing and they pretend as if now they're doing something. So I said, no, that is not the case. But coming back to this is the question that Dr. Daniel asked on Blackboard. I created online group discussions and I set up the parameters, outcomes. The outcome must be there because, as you say, if you allow students, like your student, it was the situation to digress, it confuses and it makes assessment quite difficult. But after that, I just put up what called the outcomes, which are on work integrated learning manual, and I said this is what you must do. And they must do it in terms of their own time. And I said submission time is this. And on the other side, I'm able to talk to them. I visit them on a word call, even over the weekend. I say, no, I can't see you. You're not making any contribution. And at the end, then I just take everything and I do the assessment. I just give it to them. And so far it has worked. And obviously I had to ask permission from my HOP to say, this assessment of students coming into the class and then listening to them and listening to me and what have you, sometimes it's time consuming and some students become scared. Some, you know what I'm trying to say. One student was so scared and I realized that he had a bit of a problem. He just, when I was asking questions, he just dropped everything and then went away. And then he said, I don't understand, Mr. Sichinga, you know what I'm trying to say? And it was a big deal. And that student had to miss last semester's graduation, not this one, because of that kind of an anger. But from there, I learned something that at least collaboration and group discussion works pretty well. And we can be able to see who is participating and who is not participating. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Martin. Maybe, that also made me think about a situation where I taught to a 4th year group at one stage, and I spoke to the HOD in a different session and say, this person is just having a ball online. She's really excelling. And he said, what? In the past 3 years that I had her in my class, she was the quietest of all the students in the group. So Daniela, maybe that's an answer where you sometimes find that people, the different learning paths may be that the one person can excel in a discussion group online where the direct confrontation of having to talk to other people may be a stumbling block for that individual. But put that person online in a chat room or something, and suddenly that person excels and that person works like crazy. So, by the way, that student is now a senior lecturer at CPUT. I'm not going to mention her by name, but she did excel. So it's not the, and by the way, like I say, she was always very quiet during a diploma phase, but she's currently a teaching lecturer at CPUT. So I'm just giving you examples that sometimes technology is not about the technology itself. It may be that some students are taking the technology path and the others are taking the classroom path. So we, in a blended learning environment, may find that don't separate them, but allow people to be following their own path. So for those who would like to work more on their own using a technology and all the technologies to get to their outcomes, the others may need that assistance in class, the sort of camaraderie. They need to be amongst people to be able to learn better. And yes, there are a lot of people. Remember that we've got them 12 years in school where they were told to shut up and sit down and listen. And now suddenly we try to flip the classroom. We ask them to, like what someone said to me, if you teach more than 5 minutes, there's something wrong. You need to flip the classroom. The students should be doing the talking. And suddenly it finds it difficult because that student is so used to their previous way of learning that they find it difficult to suddenly find themselves in a group discussion where they need to participate in group work. So again, that is the way that you use adaptive learning on a smaller scale. So adaptive learning is not just a big new thing that we're going to change things altogether. It's accepting that your students are different, they have different learning paths, and we need to use different modalities and different teaching modalities to be able to reach that student with their own learning path. Okay, like I said, technology just for me allows me some better paths where students can follow different paths to the end goal. They need to be competent at the end of the day in terms of the outcomes defined or the defined outcomes. But more than that, I don't think so. Okay, colleagues, again, anything else from the other participants? Anything else that you would like to deal with, to share with us?
Sakkie, there's one raised hand.
Yes, Daniela, he's in this group. Unfortunately, right at the back. I'm just listening to the question. I will then repeat it to the group. Just switch on your microphone.
Sometimes depend on the students. Blackboard, but I'm not getting
Okay, sorry, I'm just going to repeat some of that. Can you just switch off your microphone, please? Okay, maybe just to repeat some of that, it's all to do with assessment being the killer of learning. I think what was meant there is that a lot of the assessments, and I think he used some examples that we know too well. This is now Prof. Mazur 2 weeks ago at the Future Learning Conference, or Flexible Future Conference in Pretoria. I think the idea is that sometimes you find that students come to you and say, but hey, you can't ask this question because, or this type of question because you've never given us an example for that. You know, that is what he meant, is that, you know, our students are so used to basically just repeat, give back, regurgitating content, you know, that type of thing. So whenever you start looking at your outcomes, depending on how you set outcomes, you know, you shouldn't be setting outcomes and then basically follow a path of content transfer that not always linked to the outcomes. So it is a complex environment. I'm not going to minimize it, but I think you need to be able to set your assessment in such a way that it gets your student to think. You know, we need to follow the whole Bloom's taxonomy up to understanding. And unfortunately, sometimes we just look at the basic levels. But again, it's not a simplistic thing. I can't just, you know, I've just made a statement there. I didn't follow most of the other arguments in that discussion. Maybe that discussion is something that we can for another day to really look at assessment. I know that the university is now looking into the assessment policy, how to change certain things. And as an individual, I may share some ideas. I find that most of our assessment practices are just to get a tick on the board. You know, it's a ranking system. We need to go through the processes. We need to have 3 or 4 or 5 predefined assessments in predefined blocks and whatever. And you try and do your teaching around the assessment practices that we apply. At the same time, when you look at continuous assessment, we don't even do that properly, because with continuous assessment, 40% of all continuous assessment should be moderated. Do you do that? You know, previously we had the situation where students had to have a year mark of 40% and an exam mark of 60%, and then they can only write the exam if they got a pass in the 40% in the year mark. That would have limited most of our problems now currently, because all our protesters would already be at home because they would not have had a year mark up to now. Sorry, that was a personal comment. But you know, those are the things that basically that we need to look at. I think sometimes that we are trying to follow process rather than proper teaching and learning. Our processes are a little bit too structured. So if you want to really go into adaptive learning and upset the whole apple cart, I think you may even run into problems with your HODs and head of programs where they say, sorry, you know, this is our procedure and you need to have your mark ready by this time and that mark. How did I compile that mark? Now you need to show us that all the students have written exactly the same test, because that is how we assess. Can you see? This is why I say we rank students. We don't always measure their competence. We rank them. And the easiest way of ranking is, you know, to say, okay, you are going to write a test and you ask them to, from what they can pick up, to, you know, how well they can memorize. Do I want to test their memory? You know, me in the engineering mindset, engineering is all about testing and the design according to known standards, where I need to open books, I need to measure against standards. But then in a test, I close everything down and say, okay, where do you find clause? What is the content of that clause? And that type of thing. A student had to memorize that. For what? They never ever in practice going to work from memory. They're going to work in books. You had a long discussion in terms of the use of Google, where you said if your test is set up in such a way that you can Google the answer, change your test. So technically you should have students being able to Google. If they can find the answer there, then it means you most probably also Googled the test question. You know, those are the things that we need to really challenge. I think it's all about adaptive learning. Adaptive learning is more paths. We need to create more paths to the end goal. And we're not really doing that. We're trying to be too structured, too exact, too precise, too predefined. Colleagues, I see that a lot of people are, leaving us now. So maybe if there's nothing else, any last comments? Anyone would like to add a few comments on this before we close? Martin.
As you know, some of us are slow, and if someone wants to adopt this collaborative type of learning like it is now, is there any follow-up or any special assistance that one can get from the CIET?
Well, yeah, the question was in terms of support for the thinking on adaptive learning and how to convert. I think this is where we've got Ella and the team in terms of their design, their new learning design. So the learning design, we've done it now with the first cohort of lecturers where they did more or less the same thing. The first thing that they did was to define different individuals within a group. So they had to define different students, you know, and so it's a process, but it's all about the learning design. So please talk to Daniela and the team, and they will be able to assist you with your learning design so that we can improve the whole teaching and learning process.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
To have an exam, which I'm vehemently against because you can't test a practical subject. Multimedia, for all intents and purposes, is very, very practical in nature. And in the second and third year, I teach design concepts. So for about 20 minutes of 4 periods, I have a lecture about whatever concept that it is that we're dealing with. And for the rest of the period, we have a discussion about how they understand it and how it's applied. All of my assessments are sort of project-based. So I give them a brief, much like something that they would get in industry, of a lot more detailed than the ones that you do in industry, because sometimes clients come through and say, you know, design something for me, and they don't give you any specific. So I give them the tools to ask the right questions in order to glean the information that they need in order to create something. Each assignment, each project that comes back is a unique artifact, and it demonstrates their understanding of the concept. And I mark according to that particular rubric, but something might look good, but it doesn't actually fulfill the, or it isn't a proper solution. So it's in some cases quite subjective, but I try to not look at aesthetics as opposed to how well it is actually answering the question. One of the other things that we do in multimedia is we have in the second and third year.
I'm just thinking that we might be losing some people. Just hit the microphone.
Right, so in the second and third year, we've got an integrated project where there are groups of about 4 or 5 students, and they've got to go out and they've got to find an NGO that deals with a cause that aligns with them as a group, and they have free rein to pick whatever NGO they want to, and they've got to then create artifacts for each of the 3 majors for the course. So they deal with technology, which is creating a website, and the back end of that, they deal with design, which is everything from aesthetics and the way that they set up their SEO content and so forth and so on. And then they've got to do practice, which is very audio visual heavy, so motion graphics and video production and sound editing and so forth. So at the end of the year, they've got this massive project, and I've seen my third years pull things out of hats and create amazing artifacts in like a month, which is quite like industry related, because often your timelines are quite short and your projects are huge, and it gives them an idea of what the real world is like. All of their interactions are based on, you know, what they've learned in the class, and how we as lecturers who are also industry professionals have interacted with them, and it's been interesting and really rewarding seeing them come out of their shells, because they gain so much confidence in being able to go out and say, yeah, I've done something, please, can I create something for you? So they're interacting with people as real clients, as opposed to just sitting in a classroom and writing a test, because the real world doesn't actually care about I've been told, I've been hired because I know how to do something and not because of my qualifications. I hardly ever include it anymore in my CV. I just list my experiences and projects that I've worked on. So what you said earlier on is actually so very true. And I got my first job in 2005, and the woman said, I don't want to see your qualification. I want to know, can you do the job? And it's been my experience in industry for the last 12 years. And I'm now teaching my kids that, yes, doing this particular thing matters, but can you do the job? And who are you doing it for? And a lot of them will come back to me with assignments and say, like, I was trying to think what you want, what you would want. And I'm like, it's got nothing to do with me. What do you think is the right answer? And watching them grow in confidence in being able to answer those questions is really what I'm assessing, because I want holistic students to go out into industry and be professionals, as opposed to cookie cutter little robots on a thing. Okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for that. I think, colleagues, as you can see, there's a lot of good work, and I don't criticize anything. It's sometimes easy, and I agree 100% that, if you're working in a environment where you've got specific artifacts, designs, issues, projects, that's real world situations, it is adaptive learning, because what you're doing there is that none of the students are giving exactly the same project, because they're all doing different projects. So as you can see, you're leading them to the end goal of outcomes. Okay, I need to give over to Daniela. Daniela, I think I see that you've raised your hand. Over to you.
I just wanted to see, I'm just confused. If you're saying that adaptive learning is every student delivering a different project, I don't see, for me, adaptive learning is learning that adapts to the student, not the student adapting, not the student creating a project or doing a task or an assignment in his own ways. They're two slightly different things. For me, the interesting part is really, how do we adapt learning? So how does the learning adapt to the student rather than, does that make sense?
You're correct. Sorry, it was maybe simplistic for me to say that if you just do projects, that at the end of the day, that is adaptive learning. What I mean by that is that in a simple form, it also allows students to have a different path to the end goal, which at the end of the day was the outcome. But I agree that it is the adaptation of the whole learning process, so that students can have a more say in their learning path, or the design of their learning path. We're just talking here in the case of one specific subject and one example, but it's got to do with the total learner's development and learning style over the full period of study, over all the subjects. So yeah, that is not a pure example of adaptive learning. I'm just saying that by getting students to do different things to the same path in a simple form is also adaptive learning. Does that make sense, Daniela?
It does, but I think that the adapting the learning is the much more difficult. I think the idea of having authentic assessments and allowing students to choose their own way of going about an assessment is a great step. And I think that I've seen quite a bit at the university already. I would really love to see examples when the learning adapts to the student. I would love to think more about that and how one could do that. I think Yolanda, Yolanda's idea of micro learning and this idea of collecting badges, I think this is where we're going. I mean, when you're really serious about adaptive learning, I think we must think a lot more about flexible ways of delivering content and about, students being allowed to collect micro modules and build their own degree, that I think will allow us to really become flexible and adapt to students' needs and the circumstances. I think that would push us really far towards this idea of adaptive learning or flexible learning.
The examples that you've given are 100%. Earning badges and having different credits is exactly also, in terms of the total learning path, also adaptive learning, because we're looking at the outcomes of the student. I'm saying that in a lot of cases, unfortunately, our teaching practices are a little bit too rigid. We need to make it more flexible, and that's the concept. I'm not saying that it's not happening, but it can be expanded, and we can use best examples such as what Sarita is doing to really enhance what we mean by adaptive learning. Right, anything else, colleagues, before we close? I see that Sunwabu added a link on Google Forms. If you can maybe just go there and just complete the form, just feedback for us. We've distributed the form in the room here for the presents. We will just add on to this, but otherwise, if you can go online and maybe just rate the session so that we can also use that for our own performance management. Well, any last words? If not, in that case, thanks a lot, colleagues. I really appreciate the fact that you've made time available for this session. It's always nice to see that you've got people willing to contribute and to share ideas. It's sharing of ideas. It's not necessarily right or wrong, but we need to be able to listen to other people and to find, to see how people differ in their opinion. Thanks a lot and goodbye.